Hey everyone, welcome to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast, the ultimate blueprint to self-love and inner peace. I'm your host, Danielle Van. As a cognitive behavioral therapist, a life coach to women, meditation teacher, and author, I've spent my life studying and learning from the stories that make us human. It's my passion and goal to help you shift your mindset and create a lifelong revolution to help you reach your greatest potential. As many as 31 million people worldwide are dealing with some form of addiction, according to recent findings and studies. Whether it's drugs and alcohol, food or shopping, gambling, or a host of other behaviors that disrupt their lives and change their behaviors, many people are addicted. Addiction costs so many their emotional, mental, physical, financial, and spiritual well-being. But what's often not accounted for is the impact on their caretakers, the people often closest to them and working to love them through their active addiction. The toll is tremendous on the caretakers and undoubtedly works to dim their spirit and often cost them their self-love. That's why I sat down with Dana Golden, who literally wrote the book On the Road to Recovery, not only for those that are addicted, but also for the caretakers. We chat about everything from the emotional cost to how to finally step into your power and take care of yourself. So let's dive right in. The Get Your Life Together Girl podcast starts right now. So one of the things that I hear most often in private session is struggling with addiction and not understanding how addiction impacts our lives and the lives of everyone around us. And so I thought it would be a great idea to have you on and really talk about what addiction is, hear your story, how you're helping people. And then I know that you're a fantastic author of a book as well about addiction. So please introduce yourself and let's dive into this thing that we don't want to talk about very often.
Okay, sounds good. So I'm Dana Golden. I am a family addiction coach, a recovery coach. I'm an interventionist. I guess that's what keeps me busy most of the time. My passion is really working with families because I was married to an addict. I grew up with an addict in my home. So I've spent my whole life on the other side of addiction, trying to navigate that. I have two children. They were brought up in a home where there was active addiction going on. So I try to help other families get through the process of getting on the other side of being healthy and have your well-being intact when you love an addict.
I just have to sit in that for a moment. When you're saying, being on both sides of it is so important. And I don't know if you want to share a bit of your story. I know from my side of it, I'm seeing the addicts that are sitting with me and not really understanding how their behavior is ruling everything in their experience. Do you want to dive a little bit into that?
Sure. So my story is, like I said, I grew up with a father who was a process addiction person. So gambling, sex, and then I didn't know anything about addiction growing up. That was just the way my dad was. And I went off into the world and it just seemed like I fell into relationships with addicts. And then when I had a boyfriend that went to treatment, when I dropped him off at treatment, I gave his counselor person the laundry list of everything that was wrong with him. So she knew what to fix while she had him in her grips. And she just kind of shook her head at me and rolled her eyes and said, go to Al-Anon. And that was the first time I had ever heard of Al-Anon. Of course, we hear of AA and Alcoholics Anonymous, but I didn't know something for the family members existed. So I didn't go for me. I went for him because I was going to be the good girlfriend. And so I went, and I quickly learned that Al-Anon was for me and that I did have a role in it. And when you say that we're all caught up in it, it affects all of us. That's where I learned how it really does affect all of us. Everybody in relation to an addict has a role they play. In fact, I have a quiz called the 6 Family Role Quiz. It's at danagolden.com/quiz, and it'll identify for you what role you fall into. There's the hero, there's the mascot, there's the scapegoat. So there's these 6 determined roles when you're around an addict of which one you fall into, because we all respond and react to the addict and they become kind of the center of things. And then especially as women and caretakers, all our hopes and dreams become about taking care of our addict, getting our addict well, getting them into treatment, getting them clean and sober. And we forget that we have a life and that we need to work on our own well-being and figure out what makes us happy, not just how to care for our addict loved one.
Such an important task to understand what role we play, whether it's in this or in anything else that we are experiencing. And where is our responsibility, which is what you're saying, where is our particular, get off point and responsibility end? I think that is probably going to be very important because most people do not understand the true definition of addict and what that means on multiple levels. Can you kind of go through what people may be identifying when you're looking at this from your
Yeah.
standpoint?
So the three big ones are alcohol use disorder, substance use disorder, which is going to pertain to your drugs, whether it's heroin, meth, weed, so any substance of that sort, and then processed addictions, which could be food, pornography, work, anything that you're not ingesting something,
Right.
but it's an addiction. And when I talk about addiction, I think there's a multitude of definitions per se, but in my opinion, addiction is when it's causing consequences in your life, negative consequences, I should say. Right. When everybody around you is saying this is a problem, you really need to take a look at it. And you're the only one going, no, it's everybody else that has the problem. I'm just fine. So those are kind of the big predictions for me, is if you can ask yourself those things, or if you're seeing someone that's having severe consequences and everybody else sees it as a problem and they don't, it's probably a problem.
It's very important to understand. I see a lot of women that have the food shopping, even the addiction a lot of times to that emotional dysregulation, which is really interesting too. And we start looking back and saying, oh, well, that's because I actually lived with somebody who had an actual addiction. And now I'm using this against myself. The other part of this too, addiction is actually regulated in the same place that our emotions are regulated in our brain. And so when we have active addictions, we generally don't have very much emotional intelligence either.
Right, because they're two different parts of the brain.
Right.
And when one takes over, the other one is not functioning. Yeah. And I will say that all addiction, as far as everything I've seen out there, is a coping mechanism for pain.
Right.
So whether it is shopping, they're all maladaptive coping skills for some unwanted thoughts or feelings that we don't want to deal with. And addiction becomes like, the thing that's coming to mind is Pavlov's dog, right? Right. You just keep going back to something because it makes you feel better. And so when these trauma loops get going in your brain and the unwanted thought or feeling comes along and you remember, oh, when I had a cocktail, that went away and I felt better. And then it just becomes a vicious loop in the head that doesn't go away until it's disrupted and a new code or new habit is formed in the brain. Otherwise, it's just continuous.
Yeah. What are the biggest issues that you see for somebody that's on the outside or is the caretaker than the person that is in the active addiction? Well,
I want to say first off about this is that it is just as important for the family member to get help as it is the addict. And so oftentimes we don't see it because the addict is killing themselves with drugs or alcohol or whatever. But the family is falling apart, and especially that caretaker person. I mean, our well-being is shot. We're, all disease manifests in disease, right?
Right.
And so we're killing ourselves too, not sleeping, not eating right, not taking care of ourselves. We're a mess. I deal with people that have gambling stuff, and there's tickets showing up in the mail for trespassing at a casino, and there's lawyer fees, and there's money being taken out of accounts, and people and it can have drug dealers showing up at your door. I mean, the toll that it takes on the family members is just immeasurable, and we put it all on the addict, like, oh, they're the one that's suffering, they're the one that has the problem. It's just as rough and hard on the rest of us.
Exactly. It made me think about the biggest premise of which I teach is self-love. It is very difficult to love ourselves when we are caught in that whirlwind of caring for someone else, suppressing our own needs, and really struggling with what am I doing? And what am I, what's wrong with me that I can't help them? And we take this personal responsibility.
No, and I actually have a talk that I do called Loving Yourself While Loving an Addict. because it's okay to love your addict, but you have to love yourself in that process too. And I always say, loving yourself doesn't mean loving your addict any less. It just means loving yourself more. And, as much as that attention and energy and time and money that we spend on that addicted person, we need to turn that around and do that for ourselves, because we can push and pull all we want to get that addict to do what we want them to do, but they're responsible for it, not us. And we're never going to lead them there. They've got to want to get there. So all you can do is lead yourself to where you're, we call it recovery in my space, whether you're a family member or the addict, you get into recovery, but it just means you're taking care of yourself. You're doing that personal development, that personal growth.
Right.
Never want to stop, right?
Right.
Always want to be the best version of ourselves we can be. So you really got to put that time and energy into yourself. And by doing that, you are going to be the catalyst to get your addicted loved one to start looking at their behaviors and what they do. Because every addict is trying to avoid pain and be comfortable. And as soon as you start making them be a little more uncomfortable, then they have to start doing something different.
Yeah. And that's the tough part. As the caregiver, as to someone who says, I really love you so much that I want to see you well. And that person really can't understand that. And we take on so much. I'd love to dive in a little bit deeper on how the caretaker can really love themselves more and what you suggest and what they need to be doing to move through this process with them.
Well, the first thing they have to do is separate their loved one from the addiction. And I think that is really healthy for our well-being, because we get so down on ourselves, because why do I love this person? Why do I care so much? Why do I care more about this person than they care for themselves?
Right.
And the person that they are is worth loving and caring about. The addiction sucks. It's just like when we have kids and we love our kids, but they're behaving really naughty. We don't love their behavior. Right. We don't love the addiction part, but we can love our loved one. And we always have to have hope that that loved one is still there. And there's always hope that we can bring them back. But we can't do that. They have got to want to do that themselves. So what you want your loved one to do is what you need to do for yourself. So if you want them to go to therapy, if you want them to go to treatment, if you want them to get into recovery, if you want them to start eating better, if you want them to come home at decent hours and get a good night's rest, turn that and start doing that for yourself.
So important. All of those things to be able to really identify your needs and wants should first be addressed within. That is so big. I have people that I've worked with where they're saying, but I don't understand. If they loved me, they would. And I'm saying, well, okay, you're working on you. At what point do you become more important? And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hear that all the time. If they loved me, they would stop. If they loved the kids, they would stop. But they don't have the control over it like that. If there was an addiction in the way, they would, but they don't have that control. And to think that we have any kind of control over it, they don't even have control over it. How can we think we have any control over it?
Yeah. Yeah. How can we best support someone in an active addiction and be able to provide ourselves enough safe space to witness our own needs?
Oh, wow. There's
Big
a lot
question.
to unpack there. Yeah, I would say first and foremost, the nagging, the begging, the pleading, the bargaining, the threatening has got to stop. That just gives them more reason and more vengeance to use their substance of choice. So there's a difference between enabling and helping. You gotta define what that is, because every addict gets enabled somehow, and there's a lot of different types of enabling. So we really have to learn how to help them and support them and guide them to what could be good for them without enabling them. So that fine line has to be distinguished.
I know that there are so many women that love their children, love their spouses, are taking care of their parents, and they really struggle for that boundary line in keeping themselves safe emotionally, mentally, even sometimes physically, unfortunately, financially, even spiritually. And they're always looking for ways to transcend this moment. And, obviously we say you have to take care of yourself. Is there some formula? That's unfair, but you know what I mean?
Right.
To really give them this ability to know, look, if they're not going to do this, then you have to do X, Y, and Z. without enabling?
No, there actually are formulas. There are ways to know if it's enabling or if it's helping. One of the biggest ways to know that is, how do you feel after you do it? Are
Yeah.
you walking away resentful and pissed off and, mad that you had to do that? Or are you saying, I feel really good about that. I'm really glad I was able to do that for that person.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the formulas right there. And the other thing is too, is that you have to look at what the consequence would be for that person if you didn't do it. Right. So if you're stopping, hindering them from the natural consequences because you don't want them to get in an accident, you don't want them to lose their driver's license, you don't want them to lose their job. So if you're covering up, if you're lying, if you're, those kinds of things, if you're keeping them from the natural consequences of their actions, it's most likely enabling.
Right.
So, and I have worksheets on that kind of stuff that I work through with my clients to know, and they can actually put this scenario in the blank, and would it do this? And then if it's helpful and supportive or if you're enabling.
That is so big, because I think what happens, at least when when the wives and the daughters are coming on my end, and we're talking about what ultimately is trauma from their experiences, they're saying, well, I just want them to get healthy. And so I've been doing this, and I stopped at the liquor store, and I, did this for them because they're just better that way. And they don't see that as contributing to the issue.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Can you walk us through the best way? Say someone has an active addiction, but they're not really ready to face it. You said, you spend so much of your time doing interventions. How do we get to that point where we love someone so much that we really hope that we're creating a better situation for them?
Yeah, that definition, that line is different for everybody. We tend to move the line in the sand out farther and farther when we're in those relationships, something we would never have tolerated, last year. Now all of a sudden we're finding ourselves tolerating this year. And, at one time we used to have that boundary, or we used to be able to say no to that, and now we're not anymore. And that's where our self-esteem starts getting etched away at. Right. And we go down this rabbit hole where it's like, I never would have put up with that. I never would have let them say that to me. I never would have let that happen in my life. How did I get here? Right. And when you compromise so much of yourself that you're not even a recognizable version of you anymore, that's when it's time to really take a look at bringing in a professional. And it's never an embarrassment or a shame thing to bring in a professional that knows more than you do. And we deal with this all the time with addiction. People want to keep it a secret. It's so stigmatized. You don't want anybody to know. So bringing in a professional is really admitting there's something wrong. But, when you're talking alcohol or substance use addictions, you're talking life or death situations. Yeah. And obviously as an interventionist, I'm seeing more people, less for process addictions and more the lethal ones, because you get to the point where it's like, this person's just going to kill themselves, and they can't stop on their own. They can't detox on their own. They're going to go through withdrawals. They need medical assistance in a safe environment. And so that's when a professional interventionist is usually called in. But it's never too late to get someone, or too early, I should say, to get someone in there and just kind of stop it in its tracks. You need a big disruptor, because it's not, unfortunately, addiction just doesn't go away on its own. It's not something you can think your way through, or it's not logical. It's cunning and baffling. And, to have someone on your side that can really navigate that with you is just essential. And there's no reason not to have it.
Excellent points. And it reminds me of two things. I often hear just what you said. I don't know how we got to this point. I would never accept this from someone else. And then the other point of having the big disruptor. And people are afraid to do that. They're afraid to be the disruption in those people's lives, because they question, how did we get here? Why am I accepting this? Maybe if I'm just quiet and they won't drink so much, or maybe if I am loud, they won't drink too much. Maybe my behavior is the problem.
And I know, but let's just say to everybody else that you are never the problem.
Correct.
You can't be too quiet. You can't be too loud. It has nothing to do with you. And that's one of the first things I learned in Al-Anon was the 3 C's. You didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it.
Mm,
So, and I struggled with that for a long time, because if I was a better girlfriend, if I didn't make him so mad, if, it took me a long time to realize it didn't matter what I did,
right.
that
Yeah.
I was not the reason that he drank, it was all his
Mhm.
trauma and his pain that he was coping with. So, or whoever's it is at the time. So
Right.
to ever think that you do have a part in it. I don't want you to think that as a family member or loved one, you don't have a part, but your part is not about what they're doing.
Can you give us some tools on being that loved one who is carrying that shame, guilt, and blame? And you just said the three C's, so powerful. Is there a way for them to begin outside of normal therapy or working with you or someone like you to begin this process for themselves?
Two tools. One is Al-Anon, Nar-Anon, Families Anonymous. Great free resource to go
Mhm.
to. They're everywhere. You can do them virtually. They will really help you understand addiction, understand how to be in addiction, and keep yourself safe. And another great resource is Put the Shovel Down on YouTube. It's a YouTube channel just for, really, mostly somewhat for addicts, but mostly for the loved ones of addicts. It's
Mm.
called Put the Shovel Down. And it's Amber Hollingsworth. She has a practice. She works with both addicts and the family members, and often together. And then she has this wonderful YouTube channel. So just a great free resource. And if they take my quiz, it'll have some follow-up emails about your role, what it means, why you do it, your fears of stepping out of that role. Because like you said, when you're the caretaker, and you're not going to placate to that person anymore, you have all kinds of fears around that. Like, are they going to get worse? Are they going to be so mad at me I won't have the relationship at all?
Right.
So there's so many fears of stepping out of our role within that
Mhm.
relationship. And so the follow-up emails to that quiz kind of navigate that a little bit for each role.
Yeah, that's excellent. I know that I have held many hands as they sit there and they say, I really can't divorce my husband because I'm afraid he'll get worse or he'll pass away. And I can't do that to my children. And I just need to see this through while they slowly silence themselves into nothingness. It is so difficult to watch. And when you're actively in it, it's totally different than when you're on the outside of it.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
that
easy
is
for us to say, right? Looking
right.
in, right? But no, I mean, I'll tell you, the worst is when it's your kid, let alone your
Mm,
husband,
right,
because people don't want to kick their kids out of the house,
right.
It's like, I'll do this, but I'm not gonna, I'd rather have them home using in my basement than out on the streets, homeless and not safe. So there's a lot of difficult boundaries, and everybody's got different boundaries of what they're willing to do and not do. And, I always say better to have weak boundaries and hold to them than have really big, strong boundaries and not follow through.
Yeah.
So we have to take each case independently and work within what's comfortable for that family member.
Mhm. It makes me think of, just I'm a mom of 3 myself, one that's just about to head off into the world, and
Oh.
I think all the time, are you gonna make good choices that best support your life? And as parents, that's all we want from our kids, and when they make choices that do upend them or do cause problems for themselves, we wanna fix. We wanna fix it for them. And yet you have to fall a little bit too in order to be able to stand on your own 2 feet.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I teach with my families,
Mhm.
is that we can all I've been accused of being a helicopter mom and a bulldozer mom, all those things I'm not supposed to do, make it
Right.
easier for them and fix it when it isn't easy. We disservice them by not giving them the opportunity to learn and grow and figure it out. And that's just so important in life, is everybody's got to figure it out. And if we don't, we're crippling our kids or our spouses or whoever.
Mhm.
And that goes back to that, making the net nice and soft for them to land and not letting them hit that consequence. Sometimes they just need to.
Yeah. And it's hard. It's hard to watch. It's hard to be a part of. It's hard to step away from. But again, like you said, what is the cost benefit here for me at this point? I would love to talk a little bit about your greatest piece of advice for the loved one and what you feel is so imperative for them to know when they are faced with these situations.
Get into your own recovery. You want your loved one to get into recovery, which is absolutely normal and wanted desperately in any of those situations when you're dealing with a loved one with addiction. You want them in recovery, but
Mm-hmm.
get in your own recovery. And the biggest catalyst for your loved one to get in recovery is you to get into your recovery. And
Mm-hmm.
everybody's got to learn their place and learn their lane in it. And the sooner you can start making some changes, the sooner your loved one will. Because, like I said, every addict is trying to stay comfortable and avoid pain. And if you let them stay in that habitual place of comfort and avoiding pain, they have no motivation to change. So
Right.
as soon as you make it a little uncomfortable for them, and I'm not saying major things like throwing them out on the street, but
Mm-hmm.
there are little things like stop buying them liquor when
Right.
you're, because you don't want them to have to get in a car after they've been drinking to get their own liquor. But you
Mm-hmm.
can make little changes to show them, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm getting in my own recovery. I'm going to take care of myself.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried for years to take care of you. Clearly, it's not working. So I'm going to let you take care of you and I'm going to work on me. And
Right.
that's the biggest piece of advice. And it is the biggest catalyst to get your loved one to look at their behaviors, is when you start looking at yours.
Very true. And I think that it would be, can we talk about what you learned about yourself as you moved through that? Because I think that's what's so important for other women to hear, is that you're going to learn a whole lot about yourself and what you do need to address as well.
You know what I learned? Girl, get your life together.
Things
Because
are not
nobody's
adding
going
up
to do
here.
it for you.
Right. Ah.
I learned, so first of all, when growing up with an addict, I
Mhm.
kind of wasn't entitled to my own feelings and thoughts,
Right.
right? Because
Yeah.
I just wanted to play into and make my father happier and better and,
Mhm.
whatever. So I never paid attention to what I wanted or what I needed. It was just all, you just really become about that. The pivotal person in the relationship that needs all the attention, right? And
Right.
you just, everybody's reacting to that person rather than acting for themselves, or just reacting to the situation. So I learned everything about myself. I mean, I couldn't have
Mhm.
told you the difference between happy, sad. I didn't know any of those emotions. I just was on autopilot. So, and then when you don't know yourself, you don't even know if you're a good person. Like, it's like, I'm going to run from people before they can find out who I am, because I don't even know who I am. I mean,
Right.
I really had that bad. And so I moved every 3 months for 5 years. Like,
Wow.
I was so afraid of anybody finding out who I was, because I didn't know who I was. And what if I was really this bad person? And, I
Mhm.
just keep collecting all these misfits, and, I'll just run. So, I mean, thinking back now that when you ask me that question, I mean, I'm
Right.
just not even the same person.
Yeah.
Like today, I
Mhm.
can stand in my own presence and say, you're a good person and you do good things. And I look out for people. And before, I was like, I didn't know if I was selfish. I didn't know if I cared about people.
Mhm.
I just, so yeah, I got to know myself.
That's the first question I ask when women come in and we're talking about these kind of situations. Can you tell me who you are?
Mm,
And most of the time, the answer is no. And then we start working on the emotions. Can you give me the definition, your definition of happiness, joy, the negative emotions? And the answer is also no. It's like you're living in the shell of this physical form without having any connective thoughts as to what you're doing, what you want, and what you need.
that was me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's most women when we're dealing with these situations. Cause like you said, all of our energy is going to making somebody else okay.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I'm writing a memoir that someday I hope to finish, but it's called Cardboard Cutouts, because I say I
Mm,
had the depth of a cardboard cutout.
yeah. That's a very good image of what
Yeah,
exactly, you end up with, and not end up with, but start with. Maybe that's a
start with.
better
Yes,
start.
yeah,
Yeah. To start
yeah.
with.
I filled up my insides, is what I
Mhm.
say. My own insides.
Right. Expanded the cardboard into human form.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love
Exactly.
that. You literally wrote the book on recovery, and I love the title, Addiction Rescue: The No BS Guide to Recovery. How was that experience for you? And can you kind of move us through, if somebody was to sit down with your book, what are we learning? What are we experiencing along the way?
Okay, so let's back up a second. I'm going to tell you why I wrote that book, because my ex-husband ended up going to prison because of his addictions.
Mm.
And when he was going to prison, I said to him, we have a story to tell. He did get clean and sober. I was divorced from him for a long time before he went to prison because I saw that train wreck coming and I had to jump off the track. So if anybody says, I can't leave my husband, I've been there, I get it, but I did.
Right.
And there is a way through all of that. But when he was going into prison and he was clean and sober, I said, we have a story to tell. We can help other people because we've been doing that anyway. And we need to write a book. And so he kind of wrote down a lot of his stories and his stuff. And then I put the book together and did a lot of research for it. And then I wrote it, but technically we wrote it together. But it reads as if he's telling the story because it is his story as the addict. But the reason I wrote it is because I wanted to have a comprehensive, everything in one place, but not like a novel of what to do to get, well, first of all, identify, am I an addict? Is this a problem in my life? So identify it and then get into recovery and stay in recovery. And it talks about all different modalities. It's not like you got to do it this way because there is no one size fits all plan to get into and stay in recovery. But it goes through a lot of lists. I did everything in list form, like, everything from what addiction requires of you to what recovery requires of you, to all the excuses you make that you don't want to look at what's going on, to all the warning signs to relapse. So just really easy to read, easy. I say tear these pages out and stick them on a mirror in front of you, because they're great reminders. And it just goes through everything you need to know to get into and stay in recovery. And it's just really simple, comprehensive, kind of in your face, like don't, blah, 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 don't BS, I know all the tricks of the game. We've been there, done that. That's what the book's about.
Brilliant. It's so needed. By the time I'm seeing people, they are hitting bottom. They're trying to struggle with, do I stay? Do I not? If it's a spouse situation. And what do I need to do for myself? But also, why am I experiencing this? That's such a big thing too. And the answer is that's individual to you.
It is. But you know what? For every negative, there's going to be a positive and opposite reaction, right? Yeah. So it's always something to learn. I mean, I hate to say it's a lesson you need to learn in your lifetime. I mean, that's just so cliche. Thanks, I didn't need this lesson. I could have done without it.
I'm good.
So I get that. But it's all opportunities to grow. And, when I do interventions, a huge part of it is working with the families afterwards, because you're asking your loved one to change, you're asking them to go away and get help. But if they come back in a month or 30 days or 6 days or 90 days, whatever long they're gone, and they come back to the same situation and dynamic, it's just a recipe for relapse. So you all have this time while they're away to kind of get your act together, figure out your part in all of this. You get to grow and change. You're all going to learn a new language separately together. You're going to come back and then it'll work. You can't send your loved one off to learn, immersive Spanish, and then they come back to the home speaking English and nobody understands. It's not going to work. So everybody's got to get on the same page. So very important. Everybody has got to get in their own recovery, stay in their own lane, do their part. And that's how relationships work and mend and repair.
Mm-hmm. You reminded me of talking with so many women who have eating disorders, and that's their addiction. And they'll get help, and then they are put back into their same home environment where the same stressor is there, where the same food habits are there, and they feel as if they have changed. However, their environment hasn't, and it doesn't work.
Absolutely not. I tell people when they go off to treatment, you may never want to come home. It's okay to say, I can't be around my parents. I need a break. It's too triggering, whatever it might be. It's okay to start somewhere else, doing something else. If you hang out in a barbershop long enough, you're going to get your hair cut. And if you stay in the same environment long enough, you're going to relapse. So you got to change everything. The family's got to do that right alongside of the addict.
What's the next piece of this where we can just finally move on and do what's best for us?
Yeah, I think that that's a process. It's just not a one event thing. right? But it's putting the little processes in place. It's learning what you're doing that's enabling that you don't do anymore. It's about putting up some boundaries that you hadn't thought of putting up before. It's about not tolerating something that you were tolerating before. So those lines that we keep moving out in the sand, little by little, we have to pull them back in and pull, rein them in. And we have to communicate what we're willing to tolerate and what we're not willing to tolerate anymore, and being transparent and being your authentic self. And that's so hard for so many of us, especially women, or in relationships where we're walking on eggshells and we're watching everything we say and we don't want to upset the apple cart, or however you want to say it.
Right.
We're not being true to ourselves. We're not being authentic. And, learning that whatever I say is not going to, it might affect him. That person might react, but I'm not responsible for how they react. I'm allowed to have my authentic self, thoughts and feelings, and be able to communicate that. And maybe if they're being perceived wrong, and if I'm getting yelled at for them, I'm just not in the right tribe. I'm not in the right community. I'm not around the people I need to be around.
Right.
So if you can't be your authentic self and be happy with who you are, and somebody's putting, that might not be the person you want to be with.
That's exactly right. That's something we talk about so often, and even talk about the fact that a lot of times these relationships do fall into emotional abuse. And we don't even think about that. We're, oh, he's not hitting me, or she's not doing this. And we don't see that the ramifications are greater than a physical situation. There is mental, emotional, financial, and spiritual as well that go into all of that, that really does a lot of damage to us until we start cleaning it up.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of, my dad was sexually abusive in a covert way, not an overt way, right? So when we think of sexual abuse, just like we think of physical abuse, we have a concrete fine line somebody crossed and we know it, right?
Yeah.
But when it's emotional, or it's this covert sexual abuse, there's no lines that are crossed in our society that we think of as abuse. And it's kind of like trauma, right? We talk about the big traumas of rape and war and your house getting burned down, but there's little traumas, like the third grade teacher shamed you in front of the students and you were never able to move on from it. So it just comes in so many different kinds and forms, and not always the ways we as a society think that that's abusive. That really would mess somebody up.
Right.
No, it can mess people up on the smallest, littlest things that just get you and you can't move on from them.
Our definition of trauma has changed, which I think is brilliant. It used to be those big activating events that you just mentioned, but now it's anything for any reason that disrupted us and changed the way that we live our lives. And that's so important. And that happens in addiction when we are the loved ones or the one that's active in it. But it happens and we have to do the work.
I think the most important thing to remember is that we've forgotten how to take care of ourselves, and to think back to a time when you weren't taken over and your whole existence being run by this person that's running amok in your life. What did you like to do? What were the classes that you wanted to take that you never took? What items are on your bucket list that you just totally forgot about because that's never going to happen now? And I work through that with my clients. We're going to make a bucket list. We're going to make a vision board. We're going to remember the things that you had on your list of things to do, that everything went by the wayside just to do everything for your loved ones. So, I start making them do those things. It's like, you better make a plan. You want to go to the beach? You haven't had a vacation to the beach? Set a date, because we're going to make it happen. So just the thought of those things sometimes is so, it just can bring such a smile and such a sense of relief. Like, you almost don't even have to go do it. Yes, if and when you can, that's awesome. But just to start thinking in that sense again, and just relieving yourself of the duty to take care of and think about that's negative, just to focus on the positive and focus on you, just that can be such a game changer and a flipper of the switch in your mind.
It's what I call focusing on and creating the joy that you've forgotten.
You just said it. That's you put words to what I do all the time.
What is the joy that you have forgotten? What are the things that light you up from the inside out and make your soul feel like you're alive? Because when you're living like this, you're not really living.
You're surviving. Yeah, often you're not surviving. You're like you're going
Barely.
downhill fast.
Yeah, you're barely clawing your way through the day, and that's not living by any means.
No.
Did
It's
we
called
miss?
living in survival mode, which is really unhealthy. You're
It
living
is.
24 hours at a time. You can't even get past the next 24 hours. That's survival mode. And
Yeah,
you and I, our wish for everybody is to not only get out of survival mode, but be in thrive mode.
absolutely. Yeah. It's so important too for those women that are listening, whether you are dealing with it from child or husband or family member, whatever it is, when you are constantly in that dysregulation within your emotions, understand that your body is not physically well at that point. And you're living in those stress hormones, your metabolism can shut down, your immune system shuts down, the liver overproduces and throws all of that sugar into your bloodstream because it wants you to have energy to survive. And we get into our own physical messes. And so it becomes where you are dysregulated emotionally, mentally, and physically. Is that where you want to be? That's the question. Is this where I want to be? And
Yeah.
hopefully that one question will change your perspective.
Yeah. And I hope everybody says, no, that's not where I
Yeah.
want to be,
Yeah.
and works to get out of that and on me, because there is another side of that. And
Mhm.
I tell people all the time, you don't have to keep living the way you're living. There is another way.
Would you mind sharing some success stories with us of people that you see have walked this path and now are creating that joy in their lives? What does that look like?
Oh, absolutely. We see it every day. I mean, miracles happen every day when people start to get into recovery. So
Mhm.
I've had families that I never thought would come back together and repair relationships that are thriving, and they're doing great. I've had people come back together and get married again.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. I always, in the back of my head, I'm always going, if it didn't work the first time, it might not work the second time, but
Right.
at least you're in a place where you're willing to try again, so
Yeah.
that's great. Miracles happen when people get in recovery. And one of the biggest things that makes those miracles happen is when everybody takes responsibility for their part. Because,
Mm.
and this is another great thing to watch, is where somebody in victim mentality, everything's everybody else's fault. I haven't
Right.
done anything. Then they go to treatment, they get into recovery, they start looking at their side of the street, and they can come
Mhm.
back and say, you know what, I kind of was an asshole. And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then you can start having those conversations of, I'd like to do it different, I'd like to be better. And when you become accountable for how you've behaved and the wreckage that you've caused, all kinds of miracles happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
I never thought my ex-husband would have relationships with our daughters, and they're like
Mm.
besties now. So
Oh, that's
yeah,
nice. That's
that
nice
is
to
nice.
hear. Yeah, it's good for everyone involved. So
Yeah.
important. Responsibility is the key to everything. What is your role?
Mm,
What is your role?
yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
Responsibility is everything.
So I end the podcast with three pieces of advice or three pieces of personal gratitude for being able to do the work that you do. I'll leave it with you as to what your three are.
So I have a lot of gratitude, and I am a firm believer in that we need to find things to be grateful for every day, because that is a game changer.
Mhm.
So that goes right along with what I think anyway. So I am grateful for the mishaps in my life that got me into the place where I could have some personal growth and development
Mhm.
and understand who I am, because like I said, I did not. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity, that I needed help and I sought the help, and I could be the person I am today. I'm glad I could turn my struggles into my successes and help other people through the same thing I went through. I'm very grateful to be able to do that. I see so many families that just are hopeless. To be able to come in and turn that around is just an amazing thing to be able to do. I'm grateful. I'm thinking about my daughters, because they always come up in my gratitude
Yeah.
journal all the time. And I'm grateful that I got into my own recovery before my kids got of age. I started on that journey before I had kids, but I'm glad by
Mhm.
the time I had kids and they were growing up, that I really had some tools to teach them that my parents didn't have. And I don't blame anybody for anything they're doing in life, because we're all just doing the best we can with the tools we have at the time we're doing it.
Yeah.
But I'm really grateful I got some of those tools under my belt before I had kids, and that they're now 24 and 26. And I am just so grateful that they're, successful and happy My point is that they're happy and they're thriving. They are not going through the shit I went through
Right.
at their ages. So
Yeah.
very grateful for that.
They had a great role model who really identified what healing looks like. And now you get to do that for other people.
I'm just here for you. If you just have anything to sort out, I'm happy to try to help you sort it out.
You are a safe space, and I love that. We're also going to put the link to your book on the show notes. So please do go and buy The Addiction Rescue, the No BS Guide to Recovery, because as you said, the lists are there, the how-to is there, and you guide them in a way that allows the work to begin. So I cannot thank you enough for spending time with us today and hopefully giving somebody some hope that this doesn't have to stay this way.
If I did that for somebody, I'm happy, and I just want people to get happy.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to end. I just want people to get happy.
It's
Thank you
true.
so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're so welcome. It was so fun to be here with you.
Life is our ultimate teacher. So again, I will ask, what is your responsibility? And are you living the life you greatly desire? If you are interested in learning more about the road to recovery and working with Dana, you can find more about her book and her on her website, danagolden.com. You can also find her book where books are sold. Thank you so much for listening to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast. If you've enjoyed these tips to bettering your life, please turn on notifications to be alerted each week when a new episode is released. If you're seeking daily inspiration and additional tools and tips, you can follow me on social media at Get Your Life Together Girl on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Or you can visit the show notes, our blog, or the Get Your Life Together Girl website. I also invite you while you're there to check out the Women's Circle. There's already over 100 downloadable tools and practices available to you, and it's updated each week for only $9 a month. Until next time, be kind to yourself and others.